We talked about that before. And because of what I told you, remember you're not going to have that much say in who your supervisor is or how you choose a supervisor. You may end up having the most amount of say if you choose an SFB-based supervisor who you can go up to, and if you go to that person in advance of that deadline when everyone has to submit their proposal. Because once the proposal gets submitted to Dr. Murthy, he sends them the same day all to MSM. And then MSM just cuts them right down the middle, doesn't even look at them, and just says 50% will be supervised by MSM, 50% will be supervised by SFB. Then, in the SFB batch, it might say, okay, do we have somebody who has kind of a finance background? All right, Whitlock can supervise that one. Do we have somebody who knows something about, I don't know, process control? All right. Do we have somebody who knows something about marketing? All right, we'll let that one supervise that one. And they try to match the discipline with your topic without overloading any one teacher. So they want to make sure that no teacher gets more than, say, 2 to be a supervisor of, so that they spread the responsibility. And I think there's also something that says, since you have bachelor's degrees, all of you, that the person who is your supervisor has to have a higher degree than yours. I'm pretty sure that I remember hearing that somewhere. Which means we have, for instance, teaching assistants and assistant lecturers at SFB. No, not assistant lecturers. They would have a master's degree. We have teaching assistants who are full-fledged members of the faculty, but who would not be allowed to be your supervisor even if you requested them, because they have the same degree that you have. They have to have a higher degree. So anybody from assistant lecturer and above, if you approach them early enough and then look at some of these issues, this might help you. I'm giving you kind of a way to beat the system. The system is going to make it almost random and out of your control who your thesis supervisor becomes. The 2 ways in which you can get some control of that system is to petition for a new advisor. I already told you about that. But use that sparingly, and you probably only get to do it once, and you ought to have a good reason. The second way is before the deadlines come up in September, when all of these proposals get submitted, you basically say, hey, can I, in advance, already book you as my advisor? So when MSM says, we'll give these number of theses to Professor Murthy to be the supervisor of, he'll say, I already have 1, so please only give me 1 more. I'm now at my maximum of 2, because you give me 1, whatever you want, but I've already got 1 because Butera has already come to me and said he wants to work with me. That's allowed. So if you get your idea formulated early enough so that you can lay claim to somebody who you know you want to work with for one of these reasons, then instead of having to just say, well, they're blindly going to assign me, it might be somebody who doesn't act responsibly, who doesn't give me feedback, who doesn't care about me, who doesn't like my topic, you've taken your future into your own hands. Those are the only ways you get to have the luxury of a supervisor that you had some control over selecting. Otherwise, the system is going to select the supervisor for you, just so you know. So, if you're thinking of somebody, these are some of the things you want to be thinking about. As I mentioned in the first half, it's not the person who puts the least red ink on your drafts who's the one you want to choose. Ah, this one's giving me the fewest things to correct. Don't look at it that way. If your paper needs correcting, it's better to get somebody who's willing to put the time into showing you what needs to be corrected. Because come May, you have only 1 friend on your jury. Okay? So if you have said, I want the person who's really easy, doesn't make me do a lot of work, and that's your supervisor, you've only got 1 person who's now been making your life easy, and you have 2 who are going to criticize the lack of rigor, the lack of tightness, the lack of focus, because the other 2 members of the 3-member panel are not your friends. I can't say that enough. So these are just some things to think about if you're trying to choose a supervisor, to the degree that you have some control over it. You want to be looking at that common intellectual interest. You want to make sure that the person is communicating, and there are different aspects to communication. Some people say he communicates a lot in terms of what he puts on the piece of paper, but not very often. I'd rather have fewer comments, but more regularly. So frequency can be an issue. If the person says something that's not easy to understand what to change, they've given you feedback, but it hasn't been clear enough for you to act on it. So you want clarity as well. And then the style, this goes back to some of what I was saying before about whether the person uses positive or negative reinforcement. If the person says, this is rubbish, this needs to go in the garbage and you need to start over, that can reduce some students to tears. Others say, I don't want to let him down. I need to start again. I need to work hard. And they're empowered, they're invigorated by the negative feedback. So if you like negative feedback, because you say, I want it brutal, I want it honest, I want it quick, that's how I work best, then you want to find somebody like me for your supervisor. But if you want the person who's going to stroke you and say, yeah, it needs a little more work, yeah, it's pretty fine, yeah, it's pretty good, well, then you need somebody else. So if you know what the personalities are of different members of the faculty who may be taught you and are based here, you might want to gravitate towards one versus another, just based on having that kind of common approach to feedback. When I say about a creative thinker, you know, if you say, this is my idea, and the person says, oh yeah, I get it, and you could even do this with it, and you could do that with it, that's much more useful to you than the one who says, okay. And that's the end of the discussion. You want somebody who is also invested in your thesis, not somebody who's just a bystander on the outside. If it seems to you that your supervisor is also enthusiastic and also cares about the outcome, is interested in the project as if it's his or her own project, you're much better off. So sometimes you would have gotten that already from a course. You know, maybe you took a course with Professor Ganesan last year or something like that, and you said, wow, he really likes these statistics. I like numbers myself. I want to do a project where I'm doing a lot of numerical analysis. I want Ganesan because I could see he gets excited when he's talking about numbers. So you gravitate towards somebody who has the same kind of approach that you do. And that goes into empathetic as well. Matches your approach to research. Some people's approach to research, as we were talking before, can be dig deep into what you already know. Build on your bachelor's thesis for your master's thesis. Others will say, no, no, no. You need to try and build some new muscles. You need to be well-rounded. You need to be broader. Don't do the same topic, but just deeper. Choose another topic. That's a different approach to research. So you might say, no, 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 no. I want to be doing the same thing I did before, but just deeper. And I know if I work with Whitlock, he'll make me do something about some other crazy country. Forget it. I'd rather work with Monty. So you have to make decisions based on what you know about the philosophy towards research of the professor in question. Does the professor have a strong network? Some of, if you wanted to do something about that issue of RIEPA transforming into RDB and sort of the power struggles, you'd want to know who are those major players. Can I get interviews with those people? Maybe you don't know any of them personally. Maybe you need an introduction. If I was your advisor and I had been working with them before and I said, I can set those up for you. I can help you in that way. You're going to have to still do the work, but I can get you the interviews. My network becomes a way of enabling you to have a more powerful end product. So if you choose your supervisor because of his or her network, being able to open doors for you for interviews, or being able to observe a factory while it's producing some product that you want to be studying, that can be useful also. So you might want to consider the person's network. Somebody who's either a foreigner and has been here a long time, or somebody who's local and really knows an industry well, or has come to teaching having been in industry before, is going to come with a network that can be really useful for you. Patience is something that different people need more or less of. If you want the person to spend a lot of time and go through various drafts, because you say, look, I just want to get this right. If I give you 10 revisions, will you review 10 revisions? There are some advisors who'll say, sure. They're patient in that way. Others will say, look, get it right on the 3rd revision. I'm not going to just because you want to give me 10, I'm not going to give you 10 revisions worth of my time. I don't have that kind of time. They're not as patient. So you want to try and align your level of demand, your request for patience, with your supervisor's willingness to give that patience. Patience and time are kind of related. There might be some other things. Are there other factors that we should be considering when we're looking at how we would screen for the ideal match in a supervisor. That was my list, but maybe I've left some things out. Yes, John?
I think this one another one was the experience the supervisor has in thesis.
Okay, so somebody who has already been a supervisor for many could be a more valuable asset to you than somebody who's doing it for the first time or second time. Possibly true, but remember also that if the person has supervised many before, it's because the person's more senior. More senior means the person is spread in more different directions. More spread in different directions means less time for you. Somebody who is supervising their first one will say, wow, I've just been promoted. They're letting me now do my first supervision. I really want to make sure I don't screw it up. I'm going to spend a lot of time with this. And you might get a better supervisory experience from somebody who's never done it before because they don't want to screw up. And they don't have as full a plate, so they have more time to really devote to it. So I think you're probably right, that if it was me, I would want to go with the experience. Because what the experience brings is not just the experience of correcting and reviewing and sharpening and focusing, but the experience of being on a jury. And that is just critical for you. I can't emphasize enough. You want somebody who has actually sat there on that day when you're presenting in front of a crowd and saying, here are my ideas, and I think I know more about this than anybody in this room, and I welcome any of you to try and prove that that's not true. And then they start taking questions. Somebody who preps you for that. With the supervisees that I've had, I actually do a role play where I say, okay, I'm going to be the hostile person in your defense. I'm going to ask you some questions that I hope you'll be able to answer, but that are going to be tough for you to answer. And by rehearsing that way, those people are ready when they go in. You know, they've been tested much harder than somebody who says, oh, that looks fine, you'll do great. That doesn't help you to have somebody pat you in the head and say, you'll do great, that looks fine, without pushing you and testing you, because you may not really be ready for the adversarial relationship that you'll meet in your thesis defense. Those people are not your friends. And unless you've been pushed how to fight back when they ask you those tough questions, you can look bad even when you did know the material, just because you hadn't rehearsed the right things. So, yeah, maybe going with the experienced one is in general a better approach. A supervisor who's already supervised a lot of people is probably a better asset for you.
Now, for example, this is what I just said. Now, for instance, we are using actually the MSA money for thesis, which is a bit different from other, I think, universities. So if that person is not used to that money, you may actually just go astray and you find you have just used your own format.
And that's something you've already heard me say 3 or 4 times. Read that manual. Because I have sent so many of my advisees, I mean, I've probably advised 12 people by now, here, many, many more than that over the years, probably 12 here. And a lot of them aren't following what guidance they've been given. It's not that it's ambiguous or they've gotten no guidance and they just did the best they could. They've been given guidance, they didn't take the time to read that manual, or didn't pay attention in a class like this, and then they went off in their own direction, and then they were told, you have to start over again from scratch, or you have to redo this entire chapter, and it just demoralizes you. You want to get it right the first time, because that will save you time and keep the momentum going. Every time you have to stop and rewrite, stop, choose a new topic, stop, revisit, you lose your momentum. And losing momentum means you lose your enthusiasm, and you get demoralized a little bit. And it's that much harder to get your speed back up again. If you can keep the momentum by at no point being told, do it a different way, go back, start again. You avoid that, and you keep your momentum and your enthusiasm. And then it's not a burden. It becomes an adventure. It's an experience. It's something that at the end you're really proud of, and you're happy that you went through. So, yes, Joyce.
Yeah, like it's good that you've told us that supervisor with the experience was supervised before would be the best person. But I wonder, like, if somebody has got, if a supervisor has got students like for more than 2 or 3 years, and most of his students are disqualified. What could be the problem? Could it be the supervisor or the students?
Great question. And it can be both. I mean, I think if you looked at my I don't know what you call it, my history or my pattern or something like that, because I'm here and I'm at SFB, I've been given a number of people who had already had advisors that they didn't like, and they petitioned for a new one. So that means I'm picking somebody up halfway through. They've already started and had a bad experience, and they say, I don't want my supervisor, and they petition, and then they get me. I've only had a few, actually, where I had them right from the start. Most of the ones I've gotten, I picked up midway on petition. Because I've basically said, if you want to give me somebody who, at least if the person is serious, I'll take them. I don't want any lazy people. I don't care how bad they are, but I want hard workers. So I just tell Dr. Murthy, as long as these people are passionate, I don't care how badly they've done so far, and I don't care what experience they have with somebody else, I'll take them if it's in my field. So I've gotten a number of very wide-ranging people. I think that they've done well because I've put a lot of time into them. So if you say, what is the track record of a particular supervisor, I think the ones that do badly can do badly because the advisor hasn't cared much about the topic, wasn't passionate about the topic himself or herself, or even if that advisor cared about the topic, the advisor was too busy or too preoccupied to spend the time that he or she should have spent as a supervisor. Third thing that can happen is that the student is a weak student. Student's got other things going on. I just had a baby. I don't want to lose my job. I can't really devote time to this. As long as I get a passing grade, I don't care. If you get a weak student or one that isn't putting out, then the grade can be bad. And remember, somebody who says, all I care about is passing, all that person has to do is get the flu. All that person has to do is get a migraine. And instead of a 60, they get a 59. Okay? If you shoot for just passing, saying, I won't have to work very hard to just pass, you sometimes get it just wrong, and you end up on the wrong side of that passing line. And I've certainly seen that as well, too. So you get students who are just trying to basically get by and not to excel. And then they end up with weak grades. So there'll be the name of the supervisor next to that student, but I wouldn't blame the supervisor for that poor grade. That was a student who wasn't applying himself or herself with very much effort or enthusiasm. So they can both be the case. There are instructors who continue to keep their job and don't seem to do very much by way of supervising. They're what I would call weak supervisors. But they're not necessarily weak because they don't read. It might be that they read, but they just put a check mark on a page rather than some detailed comments of what should be changed. And then when you get into the panel of judges, the other judges are saying, how come this wasn't changed? How come this wasn't reworked? This is too big. So that check mark, which you might have said, he liked that page, he didn't make me change anything, comes back to haunt you. So it's a very difficult thing to judge, the track record of a particular supervisor, how many of his or her students passed or failed and with what grades. I don't think there's a very clear track record. Some even excel in spite of their bad supervisors by just managing their supervisors aggressively. You know, I need to hear from you. I must hear from you. They call MSM and they go, my supervisor hasn't written back to me and it's been 2 weeks. Then they write to the dean of MSM. My supervisor hasn't written back to me and MSM management hasn't written back. And they just make so much noise that they get that supervisor to give feedback, even though the same person doesn't give feedback to other students. Just because in the temperament, the personality of a particular student, it's the personality of making noise. I encourage you to make noise, but not everybody is comfortable doing that. Yes?
I can add on my point. If a supervisor is hardworking, is making the student hardwork, I don't understand how the student can fail. Because of course the supervisor has made them like working hard and you come up with a good work. So how come that you can fail or be disqualified at the end?
One of the reasons, and I'll get to it in just a few minutes on another slide, is students looking you in the eye saying, my English is great, and their English is terrible. And they bring you this thing, and correction after correction after correction. Do some proofreading. Get somebody else to read it. Get a professional editor. But the person doesn't do any of those things because he walks away or she walks away saying, my English is great. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He comes back again, the English is still bad. And it goes over and over and over like that. The English never gets any better. And, you know, this isn't just about content. This is also about form. You can't have a great idea that's expressed in terrible English. It has to still be in good English. And a lot of them get turned back for the bad English. And bad English can be corrected, but it requires that the student accept that his English is bad. And a lot don't. What can the supervisor do except keep saying, get an editor, in big red letters at the top, get an editor. Learn English.
English cannot be the big problem, the big issue. The issue should be like the content of your work, of your thesis.
No, you're wrong.
I understand, yes, English is also needed. It must be like good or what, but the most important is the content of the thesis.
You can't even say that. No, I disagree. You can't say the most important. By saying the most important, that's opening the door for the follow-on sentence, which is, the English isn't important. And now you get something which is in incomprehensible
It
English.
is important, but I think content is more important than English.
Well, I'm not going to fight with you. If you hold that belief, I hope your English is excellent. Because if you hold that belief and your English is poor, see you next year. I'm just telling you in advance. You are on a path which is not going to end up where, at the light end of your tunnel is not going to be light, it's going to be the light of an oncoming train. It's not the light at the end of the tunnel that you hope it will be. Well, I hope your English is great if you have that belief. Yes?
Like what I'm wondering is, does the supervisor take time to take that student that you're not going to pass? Because what I've seen, you're not going to pass. Maybe for the student to improve or think otherwise. Or he just leaves it, and when he reaches before the panel, he's disqualified. Because I think even the supervisor himself or herself is embarrassed. If you can't manage to advise your student on what to do, or even stop her to go for defense because she doesn't qualify for it.
If it's bad enough, that's exactly what happens. The advisor will not recommend the candidate to go forward for the defense. And that will have come out because you have to already have done well enough on the written exercise that it gets to be defended orally. So if you haven't been following any of the advice, haven't been listening to what the recommendations are from your advisor, what should happen as a result is that you score badly. By scoring badly, you won't be allowed to go forward to defend. Only a passing thesis gets to go to defend. So if you've already, in effect, failed the written part, you won't even get to defend. Ideally, the problems are identified and corrected before that point. And that's why I'm saying if you think you're doing everything you can be doing, and that the instructor is the one who's at fault, ask for a change of instructor. It can happen that the instructor says, this person is never going to pass because he or she is not listening to my advice, is not taking this seriously, has a 4th grade reading level, doesn't know the basics of research, and I'm supposed to be doing graduate level research with this person and they belong in primary school. We have cases like that. So at that point, that student has to put in basically superhuman effort and go to a support network beyond just the instructor. Now, it has to maybe get a tutor, has to get an editor to help with the English, has to make the product of graduate standard, postgraduate level standard, even though he or she might be so weak that that's almost pushing beyond what he or she is capable of. That sometimes happens too. So there's not a pattern to who's to blame. The blame can be on either side. The key, and my takeaway for you, is identify it quickly. Whichever side it's on, identify it quickly and see if you can't come up with a more compatible marriage between student and supervisor to move forward with success. Yes. Yes.
another issue with the plagiarism. It's a request. We would like to have that CD so that before even some students get embarrassed with high percentage of plagiarism, they can reject their book before even it reaches to MSA.
Okay, I'm going to be talking about plagiarism tomorrow. If you can just bring up the same issue again, in case I forget to bring it up. But it's on the agenda for tomorrow, not for today. Okay, we won't forget to talk about plagiarism in various forms and aspects. So, this is just a little bit more to reinforce the idea of trying to find common ground with your supervisor. It's been up for a little bit while I was talking, so you had a chance to look at that. Plus, of course, it's going to be posted tomorrow to the web, so you don't need to write anything down. Just some more things to think about. Now, moving from supervisors to the writing part. We've talked about research, we've talked about coming up with a topic, the writing. The writing is the heart of this exercise. This is a written assignment. Nobody is saying, do some reading and then come in and talk to us. They're saying, write down what you find. Write down your conclusions. So when you're doing writing, you need to be clear about a certain number of things here. And they're not mutually interchangeable. So I wanted to just make sure, this is not just so that you learn more vocabulary words. It's so that you learn to distinguish the way scholars, and most of the people who will be your supervisors are academics for a living. They're not managers, they're academics first. So the fine nuances of language and words matter to them. So they might say, your work is complete, meaning you've covered all aspects of the topic. It's complete. But the topic you covered is an irrelevant topic. Complete is not enough. It might be accurate, meaning that you have done what you were supposed to do from the point of view of being precise, and you have not said anything that was not true, but what you talked about was not the topic that you're supposed to talk about. Remember, you all have a topic, a title page, and if what you write about is everything's very true, yep, it's absolutely accurate, but it has no bearing on what you said you were going to tell us about. And this happens in, I'd say, 25% of all of the theses. It's a very common mistake. Some things are rare mistakes. This one is a common mistake. People say in their title, this is what I'm going to tell you about. And they tell you about something different. That one is not good either in terms of an outcome. It's clear. It can be clear, but about something which has nothing to do with what you said you would talk about. So you can't come back to me and say, but teacher, it's clear. That's not good enough. Okay, I'm showing you some of the things that students will often come saying, but why didn't you like it? Why did you tell me to rewrite? It's clear, it's accurate, it's complete, but that's not necessarily enough. Concise. Concise means not a lot of running on, long-windedness, not a lot of repetition, not a lot of verbiage. It's succinct. If you know the word succinct. It's precise, it's to the point, it doesn't wander. That's very nice. But sometimes people are concise at the expense of giving a complete explanation of something that they should give a complete explanation to. So you actually need to say more in order to fully cover your topic. So just saying, but it's concise, teacher, isn't necessarily going to save you. Interesting. You can tell me an interesting story about rabbits and how they propagate in the woods of Nyungwe. But if you told me that your topic was the free trade zone in Kigali, I don't care about rabbits propagating in Nyungwe. It might be very interesting. It has nothing to do with what you're supposed to be talking about. So I want it to be interesting, but interesting is not enough. Compliant means that it complies with the manual. It's the right number of pages, in the right font, with the right margin. It's got a bibliography, it's got a literature, it's got a summary, executive summary up front, it's got footnotes, it's got everything. It's compliant. But it's so weak, or it hasn't in any way been original. We talked about the difference between new and original. It's not original at all. It's not a contribution to the body of knowledge. So I'm giving you a vocabulary of excuses that students give when their papers get turned back. These are the ones that they give. They say, but teacher, it's interesting. But teacher, it's very clear. And I'm just pointing out to you that together, you probably have a strong paper. But if all you have is one of those, and you want to convince me that I shouldn't make you rewrite, because yours is very clear, or very interesting, or very compliant, you're not likely to convince me or any other supervisor. This is not just me and I'm particularly strict. I'm really speaking for the supervisors now. Because all of us also have to grade more or less to a similar standard. We can't be too far off, otherwise we create distortions. So it's useful for you to know what a package would look like that is likely to be of a high quality. If you have all of those, if your thesis is complete, accurate, clear, concise, interesting, and compliant, you will have no problem. Guarantee. My guarantee to you, you will have no problem. If it is all of those things. This is something, as I say, it's voluntary, but that I think you might find useful as a way of helping to crystallize your own writing skills and talents. Because many of you talk more easily than you write. You have more of a writer's block than you have a speaking block. If so, think about your thesis topic and just say, okay, this is how I would talk about it to someone over dinner while we're driving into the countryside. And then transcribe that. If you captured it on a tape like this, and then looked at those words, you now have your informal way of talking captured. With that as a point of departure, figure out what do you need to do to turn that into formal, academic, rigorous, defensible writing. Because the way you speak is not identical to the way you would write an academic piece of work. So you need to get good at identifying where you've said, I'm just going to pick on you, Joyce, but not only you, I can pick on Estelle or some others too. You know, every third or fourth word that you use is the word like. I would really appreciate it if you would give me more time to collect my thoughts, because it's really hard for me to think when I'm in a class with everybody. Every third or fourth word. If you wrote that way, there's no way anyone would ever accept that as acceptable writing. Okay? You couldn't write the way you talk. You simply couldn't. We would just throw it back at you and say, that isn't English. Those likes don't belong there. They add no value at all. And part of what you're supposed to be is concise, non-repetitive. Make every word count. All those likes are air. They're adding nothing. And you would just see X, 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 X. You couldn't write that way. But by capturing the way you speak and actually making a transcript of it and realizing, wow, I'm saying that an awful lot, and it provides no value addition to the argument I'm trying to make in my thesis. It also improves probably even the way you speak in the long run, but it will tighten up the way you argue your case in your written work by seeing the way you speak and making that the point of departure and tightening it up, making it better, having seen first the transcript of how you speak, and from that formalizing it, making it more academic, making it more rigorous, making it more grammatical. So it's something that you can just do as a weekend activity when you've got a little time. Record yourself. A lot of you have cell phones now that allow you even to record, or you have digital recording devices, where you can talk to Raphael and say, can I borrow that video machine and just record myself that way, and then play it back and just do a transcript of the explanation that you give to your loved one of what your topic is. So you say it informally and then you formalize it from there. I just think it's an exercise that would be time well spent. So, still dealing with the topic of writing, let's talk about quality of writing, which has a whole lot to do with the rewrites and sending it back for revisions that we find. Even if you think that it's the substance that matters more than the form, Estelle, that you're wrong. Okay? On this one, you're just wrong. You might like that the world was that way, but it turns out that they both matter equally. And as brilliant as your ideas might be, if they're not packaged well, it'll be sent back and sent back and sent back, and you will not be allowed to go forward. And that's not just me. The only thing that might save you is that some of the supervisors are not native English speakers, so that their standards are not so high. But if you happen to get a native English speaker, none of them will allow it to go forward with sloppy English. So you're going to meet these particular challenges along the way. So you need to get used to them. Grammar, vocabulary, syntax, repetition, and hubris. And I'll talk about each of them in sequence. Grammar errors. Yes?
The last point on the previous slide.
I'll get to it. I'm now taking each of them. So there was a list here, okay, of 5 things. And now I'm going to have 5 slides to deal with each of these 5 things. So the one that you don't know yet, in 5 slides, we'll get to that one and I'll talk about it. Even though I've already mentioned it. Grammar. Okay. Let's take a look at this one. These are just some typical errors. I'm just giving you examples, but they're taken from the work of people in this class. Okay. So, exactly. You can't say uses, which is singular, when you've got Uganda and Rwanda, which is plural. Okay? It has to be use different approaches. It's a simple thing, and you might say, don't be so picky. But we are picky, and it's not just me. So you need to see things. You need to pick up things like that. What's the problem with the next one? Report is singular. So it can't be have, that would be for plural. The report has taken many months. So those are grammar errors. And you need to be conscious of them. And if you're not Anglophone but Francophone, struggling in English, you really do want to, when you're doing these drafts, have somebody who is maybe native English speaker take a look at them before you even give them to the supervisor. As somebody who spends a lot of time grading these dissertations, these theses, I get very upset, and it actually affects my relationship with my advisees when they don't make the investment in English proofreading before giving it to me. I am paid too much money to become a primary school English grammar corrector. That is not how I should be using my time. I should be a thought leader for you. I should be saying, here's a way that you can take your concept further, deeper. I once read a study that I think you could draw on to help illustrate your point. That's how you should be using me, not correcting those kinds of errors. That's not what the rector of the university should be spending his time doing. And even the other supervisors will say, I can't believe that I'm having to do this. They should have been doing that work. That should have been corrected before it ever came to me. I'm telling you this because you will actually sour your relationship with your supervisor by bringing these kinds of errors still in the paper to the supervisor. Correct them before they get to the supervisor. So those are grammar type errors. Next one. Oops, sorry. This one? Grammar. Okay. So vocabulary type errors. Vocabulary is when you use the wrong word. Okay? It's when you use the wrong word. The last time you were having problems of tense and case. This is using the wrong word. It's a vocabulary error. What's the problem in the first one? Innocent. What's the problem in the first one? Okay, why is that a problem? It should be what? You don't like elemental. But what do you want to put there instead?
Sorry?
What do you want to replace it with?
I should remove A and L.
Remove A and L. And then you want to say the most element approach? That would still be wrong. You're right that the problem is with the word elemental, but what do you replace it with? Yeah, you could say important or fundamental, something like that. But elemental isn't the right word to use there. Elemental, what does it even mean? I mean, it has to do with the elements on the periodic table. I mean, it has nothing to do with this. You can't say the elemental, but some of you don't use language well, so you might use elemental thinking that it really means fundamental, but it doesn't. Okay, but the second one was the problem. Yes, dimensions is the problem. It's out of place there. Somebody has thought that that's the right word to use, but if your English is good, and most of you picked that up right away, that that's where the problem was, you would just scratch your head and say, powerful dimensions? What are they? Are we talking about the Twilight Zone and aliens? What does that even mean? Powerful dimensions are often at work. no, you might say powerful forces artwork or something like that, but dimensions isn't the right word. So that's a grammar problem. You also just need to be aware of grammar problems. Next, syntax and spelling. I'm putting those two together, but they could be put into their own categories. Spelling mistakes, if you're using Microsoft Word, you shouldn't ever have a spelling error because you'll get a little red line under any word that's misspelled, and it's telling you, do something about this word. It doesn't exist the way you spelled it. And it's only if you are actually ignoring what the technology is giving you that you should have any typographic errors, any spelling errors. Syntax is different. Syntax has to do with usage. So usage is how we use the language and are we using it correctly or incorrectly. So this was my example from earlier. I hope to explain how BPR was able to so that use of is inappropriate. What about this EXPLEND? It's not a word. It doesn't exist in English. You want to say expand into Kibuya. As in branch banking, there's no such word as expand. It's expand. So maybe it's a typo. Maybe it's somebody who isn't really Anglophone and has heard that word expand and thought that it was expand and writes it the way they've heard it. But it's still wrong. And it would still show up on the spell check because there will be a little red line under it because there's no word in English, EXPLAND. So it's partly a syntax and partly a spelling one. Now this next one, this is the way some of you speak. I'm telling you, everything I've put here I've taken from theses that I have graded. I went through my copies because I keep them all. So the ones that I have in my office, that I have graded and been the supervisor for, is where I've gotten, that is where I have gotten these. Yes, what is it? Yeah, just Bank Popular de Rwanda, and if early in your thesis you've said, I'm going to write a thesis about Bank Popular de Rwanda, parentheses BPR, you've now defined your abbreviation. Once you've defined it, you can use the abbreviation without using the full form throughout the rest of your thesis. But you have to, the first time you use it, you have to put down what a full form was. So anyway, those are syntax errors. And I haven't made them up. Okay, they're real. Do we have to keep listening to that, or can you turn that off? My members of the class will tell you what I do with people who keep doing that in my class. They have to go fishing for their things outside the window. So next, repetition examples. This one I'm not giving you specific examples, but there are two kinds of repetition. Intentional repetition, where you say, because what you'll see in the manual is it says that this is a 50-page exercise, it's a 50-page paper. Some of you will say, I only have 30 pages of things to say, but if I repeat some things, maybe I can get it up to 50. So you're doing intentional, you're padding the size of your paper just to get it to 50 pages. So you're repeating on purpose. Now you need to know that we'll find that, okay? We'll catch that and we'll exit out and say, give me some substance, don't give me repetition. The other is unintentional, because you haven't remembered that way back on page 19 I already said that and now I'm saying it again. I'll tell you where it happens a lot. Somewhere in your basic primary education, many of you in Rwanda have learned that the more I define something, the smarter I sound. So you'll start off by saying, my topic is about foreign investment, and then you'll have a footnote. You'll say foreign. Foreign means non-domestic, non-national. You know what foreign means, but you're defining every single thing. Then later on, you talk about foreign exchange. You go foreign. Foreign means non-national, non-domestic. So we've already seen the definition, and you forgot that back on page 7, you talked about foreign direct investment and defined foreign, and now you're talking about foreign exchange, and again you define foreign. So it's unintentional, but it's repetitive. So sometimes people do it on purpose, sometimes not on purpose, but I'm just saying to you, don't do it, because it leads for a weak, sloppy, lack, non-typed, non-concise paper. Hubris. This is the one you said you didn't know that term. So, I already told you about hubris, even though I didn't use the word before. It's when you look me in the eye and you say, but Dr. Reid, my English is great. Why are you putting so much red marking on my paper? And you think that you're the expert in English. Why? Because you came in first in your class in Uganda, so that makes you good in English. It just makes you better than the other bad people. It makes you less bad. It doesn't necessarily make you good. So don't think that because nobody has corrected your English before that your English is great. And I see this particular problem over and over and over. And this goes back to what you were saying, Joyce, but surely the student would go back and correct if they've been told to correct. They don't, because they'll say, what does he know? My English is good. Nobody's ever told me my English was bad before. This guy must be the one who's just being difficult. And they won't correct the things that are circled or that are underlined in red. They won't correct them because they are convinced in their heart that they are great at English. And then you end up with a conflict between the teacher or the supervisor and the supervisee. One making all these corrections saying, this is wrong, correct it. And the other one saying, what's there to correct? My English is good. Well, I'm pointing this out before you even get started, letting you know that it is often a phenomenon that we supervisors see. So it's one that you should just leave your ego aside and say, all right, well, he seems to be marking an awful lot. I thought my English was good. Let me just make these corrections. Don't have a speech with us about why you think your English is great or is better than ours. Literature review. I want to spend a few minutes on this because this is another thing that is done badly, pretty consistently. The purposes of the literature review are as follows. See those 4 dots. That's why we do the literature review. Okay? We do it, we ask you to do it for a very specific reason, and we ask for it to be done early on in the process for a reason. The only way we can start big and get small is to know what else has been done. The only way you can be sure that your work is original is to know what's it different from. That's what makes it original, but you have to know what else is out there in order to make yours different. You have to be able to say, everyone else has looked at this problem this way, but there's a flaw in doing it that way. I'm doing it another way. But you can't say that unless you can say, and I've read what everybody else has done. I'm speaking from experience, and I know that their work has a flaw. So that's where the literature research comes from. So you have to do that literature review. The literature review is also more than just a bibliography. Notice here I'm saying how to distinguish from a bibliography and an annotated bibliography. Who can tell me the difference between a literature review, a bibliography, and an annotated bibliography? Nobody. Okay, that's why we have a class. I'll tell you. A literature review is non-exhaustive. It doesn't cover every book that you will have used in your thesis. It will usually be the list of books that you went through to get you started, to show that your topic was worth doing at all, and to show that you're not repeating work that's already been done, i.e. yours is original. That's what the literature review provides. It is not a full inventory of every book that you used for your thesis. The bibliography is that document. The bibliography is an exhaustive, a total and complete list of every book you actually used in writing your thesis. An annotated bibliography doesn't merely say, Reid, Whitlock, Land Reform in Rwanda, Macmillan Press, 1988, Kigali, Rwanda. It doesn't just have that basic information. After that, it would say, a thorough study detailing the history of land reform in Rwanda from independence through 1988. Unfortunately, used no Kenya Rwanda sources. Otherwise, a very complete study and treatment of the topic. Okay? It's kind of a summary of the citation, a summary of that reference. The book you used, you've now said, should somebody else use it? Was it worth using? Was it a good investment of your time? Was it a good book? It's giving a bit of almost a critique, a review, a tiny book review. That is an annotated bibliography. It's the bibliography with the citation and then a bit more. That is not required for your thesis. But you should know the difference between an annotated bibliography and a standard bibliography. You should also know not to pad your list. A lot of people say, I'll get extra points if my bibliography is really long. And so you walk through the library, and every book you even set your eyes on, you put in your bibliography. Well, I looked at it. Come on, I want to put that one in the bibliography too. No. Because the only books that should go in the bibliography are books that you actually used. If you used them, there should be a citation somewhere. Which means that any footnote in your text, in the body of your thesis, should have the book that the footnote is citing, or the article, showing up in your bibliography. It should be a complete list of everything that helped you create your thesis. Not things that you looked at and then said, this isn't relevant, and threw away. Don't put that on your bibliography. Leave it out. Don't cry about it and say, oh, my bibliography is going to be shorter. Too bad. You only put the things you've actually used. That's what that bottom thing is about. Okay? The other thing is just kind of advice from having been a researcher for a long time. The day you start thinking about your thesis and doing any research at all is the day you need to start keeping your bibliography list. Because you will find things online, and then later you'll say, where was that? Where did I get that? What word did I put into Google to find that? And it's lost forever. A very interesting website, a very interesting article, and you won't be able to find it again. As soon as you know, I am now doing my thesis research. I've started. Have some place on your computer, some place on a piece of paper, some little cards that you use where you write down every legitimate reference so you don't lose any. Because it actually is important for us as supervisors and even for the jury to see how much work did this person put into researching the literature that was out there. And you don't want to lose, just because you couldn't find the reference later, a potential bibliographical citation that you could have gotten credit for. Yes, Vincent?
Mine is on the list of bibliography. You may quote like a podcast on a certain topic, maybe on the content of it, and then you quote him. Is that advisable that you can also quote him when you have gone on another, maybe on another chapter?
Yes.
If you are talking of laws of motivation, you have quoted him. Then you have gone to obstacles. You have quoted him. Is it acceptable?
Yes. Then, I mean, what you would put then is upside. It's an abbreviation, it's a Latin abbreviation, but what it means is there's already been a reference to the same book. So you would say, there's already been a complete reference to the same book. I'm reminding you, I don't need to give you the full reference, I'm giving you the shortened form, and then you would say something like this. So you don't need to say, Whitlock, Reid, Land Reform in Rwanda, 1960 to 1980, Macmillan Press, Kigali, Rwanda, 2002. You just say opposite. I've already cited. The work, opera citate. The work has been cited. And it reminds you to go back to the place where the full citation was already listed in the footnotes, and then you can just give, under that second reference, the shortened form. Next thing, just to quickly point out, is about data analysis. I want you to remember that there's a difference between reporting and analyzing. What some of you do, even in the courses that I've had with you, is you look at data and you say, it went up 20%. Oh yeah, it went down 10% there. Oh yeah, right there, it was unchanged over that year. Yeah. And, therefore, due to, because of, you've got to tell me a story. This is a story waiting to be told. Why is it that emigration and immigration would go up at the same time? People are leaving the country in the same number that they're coming into the country? If they're leaving, is it because of a bad economy? Then why are people coming in? There is a story here. You can't just say, well, from 2000, immigration is up 2%, immigration is down 4%. You haven't told me a story. You're reporting, you're not analyzing. I'm telling you, before you start your research, You need to analyze your data and not just report it. The next one is another example. If you do this and just say, well, of people who have jobs in Rwanda, 28% of them have professional jobs, and 6% of them have manual labor jobs, and 14% of them have civil service jobs. Can you tell me, what do you make of that? Wow, this is an economy bloated by the civil service. Very few entrepreneurs. Can you tell me more than just, these are the percentages? Reporting versus analysis. You don't need to read those graphs. I just want you to understand the concept. That's the takeaway. Primary versus secondary sources. Now, primary sources of information are very rare. Most of what you will use are secondary sources. You use a book, you use an article, you use a journal, you use a magazine. Those are secondary sources. What's an example of a primary source? When you do an interview, yep. If someone has a diary where they've been keeping their own diary of, today I had a migraine, today I met the rector, tomorrow I have a meeting with the minister and I go to Parliament, and then you get a hold of someone's diary. That's primary material. That's from the hand of the author. Things like that are primary source material. Primary is good when you can get it. If you work for Catholic Relief Service or some other NGO, and you happen to be their monitoring and evaluation officer, and you have access to their evaluation of a project, that evaluation of that project is primary source material. It hasn't been published anywhere. It's unpublished, and it's only available to people inside CRS or Save the Children or Oxfam or whatever it is. But you may have access because of your job. So primary source material is really good because nobody else has tampered with it. Nobody has interpreted it. It's raw data. The bad news is you now have to do something with it. If you use secondary material, somebody else has already massaged it. Somebody else has already said, this is what I make of it. This is the result I get from the data. But some of the most original work comes from people looking at secondary data, looking at the footnote saying, well, where did they get that secondary data? Oh, they went to the CRS monitoring and evaluation report. Let me go to the same report. They go back to the same report and they say, I get a different conclusion. I did my analysis a different way. Now you've got an original topic. You've taken the same data, but you've crunched the numbers a new way, you use different assumptions, and you've got something that would be a contribution to the body of knowledge. So you need to be aware of primary versus secondary sources and look for both. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. You probably are going to have more secondary, so that's fine. But be used to thinking, is there primary source material? Can I interview somebody? Is there somebody's journal or document, unpublished record that I can also get access to?
Excuse me.
Yes.
I would wish to take you back to the literature review. I was asking,
This one or this one?
any,
Okay.
how good can one cite in the literature review so that you fight plagiarism? Because most of the time you find that what you're doing, the biggest percentage in literature review is someone's knowledge.
Okay. We're going to do a whole chunk of tomorrow on plagiarism. So it's not going to be forgotten. It's so important and it's created so much pain for our students that I'm devoting serious time to it tomorrow. You'll definitely get it. It's in the plan. So I've already said that there is a complete set of our theses from everyone that's ever been accepted and been awarded a degree here at SFB. That is something that we do have even in our very small library. So if you flip through it, just take a look at some that have been accepted, some topics that might be similar to ones you're considering, and say, well, what did that one look like? What did they cover? What does their bibliography look like? How detailed was their analysis? Were they broad or wide? Was it a Rwanda topic or foreign topic? You can get some ideas and get some sense of what quality we insist on. I'm trying to think of whether the ones in the library show the final grade. I don't think they do. No, they don't. So it could be misleading. You might get one that was a 61. And you say, all right, well, this was accepted. That's very different from one that was a 93. Okay, so since you don't know what grade it got, don't necessarily assume that it represents the best of what we pass. It could be that it's on the bottom end of the ones that we pass, because it just has them without a grade in them, I'm almost certain. But use the MSM library. Raise your hand if you have already used the MSM online library. Raise your hand, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. You see, if you're 8 months into a course, more than 8, you're 11 months into this course. You're 11 months into this course, and you are you're at a university whose library has 2,600 books. But you've been given a password to have access to a library that has 1,300,000 books, 1,300,000 books. You need to use that online resource. It's a really great library. It's easy to use. They've got so many journals, not so good on books, but very good on articles and journals, and even on newspapers. And I've asked them, and maybe it's because I'm a professor, I'm not sure if students can do it, but if you say, I'd like this book sent, they'll send you a book here to Rwanda from their library. Even a book. So don't assume that books are off limits. And if there's some book that you really need and they won't let you do it, tell me and I can probably get it. At least professors can get books. I'm not sure the students can, I'm just not sure of the rule.
That's how much.
But you have to pay some money.
That's how much.
For the
That's
books.
the cost.
Maybe that's for students only. We don't. Or there's a budget for, part of my compensation is I'm allowed to do that and I don't have to pay myself. So if they're making you pay and you need some book, and it's really a key book for your research, let your supervisor know, and the supervisor can get you that book for free probably. Okay. How to cite, that is what we're talking about a little bit here. What's a proper citation? It's just important that you write a complete citation. Okay, it's not enough to just write, Whitlock 2010 on the bibliography. You can write that in a footnote, but the bibliography has to be much more complete than that. It has to allow somebody else who is not so familiar with your work to find the book that you are using as your reference, as your source. They have the equivalent of a scientist being able to replicate an experiment in the social sciences, which is what you're in, is having somebody be able to find the source material that you used, which means you have to describe it in enough detail that someone else, who is not you and not an expert, can find it. Something I'll just mention in passing about URLs, okay? Universal Resource Locators, websites. When you cite a web page, you need to put the date when you cited it, because web pages change their content. So if you are referring to something whose content has changed, the SFB homepage that Raphael maintains, we've got new material on that today from what we had a week ago, because we've now had a graduation and we've had a visitor from the International Monetary Fund. So you need to say the date when you accessed that URL, that website. That's an important part of your citation. So this is going back to that same list that I did in the very beginning, just talking about the timetable, pointing out to you that you have periods of real intensive work, like conducting the research, and periods of more moderate research drawn out over a longer period, like the workshop. There's not that much that's being required of you in these 2 days. And even the writing of the paper, where you've got all of February, all of March, and half of April. It's not a frantic activity. Conducting your research, depending on how ambitious your topic is, could be frantic. So you need to pace yourself and plan your schedule and your calendar accordingly. So today's the end of day 1. It's earlier than what we'd said we would end, but we're going to end right now. Just remember that bottom line, what is it we're aiming for? We want something that is rigorous, that's scientific, that has conclusions based on findings, not just based on assumptions or guesses or your thoughts or your politics. You need to research this product, okay? And then you need to say what happens as a result. You need to say, this is my recommendation, this is what I would do, this is what I would change. So if we do that, we'll be on the right path. We'll deal with this more tomorrow. Please do take a look at the course outline. The homework is simple. It's just to do basically what you saw when Joe said, this is my idea for EAC, or when Estelle said, this is my idea for how I do direct investment, for each of you to come in with that, even if you later change your idea, so that we can kind of go back and forth and help you firm it up as a class. Okay? Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.